This is an introduction to confirmation bias. We like to think that belief, or even practical logic, works something like this. We encounter evidence, we consider that evidence, and after careful consideration, we decide what to believe. Sometimes that happens. Often, instead of carefully considering evidence and drawing conclusions, what happens is that we already believe something. We already expect something to be true, and those expectations influence what information we look for in the first place. It influences what information gets our attention and what we do with that information once we find it. This is called confirmation bias. Raymond Nickerson, a psychologist and argumentation researcher, described confirmation bias as the tendency to seek or interpret evidence in ways that, rather than being objective, are deeply influenced by beliefs and expectations we already hold. Now, notice what that particular definition does not say. Confirmation bias does not mean having false belief or believing something that is not true. You can believe something that is actually completely true or quite defensible, and still have a tendency to evaluate evidence through your own personal biases and assumptions. One of the earliest demonstrations of this comes from psychologist Peter Watson. In the 1960s, Watson gave people a sequence of numbers, 2, 4, 6. He told them that the sequence followed a rule, but he didn't tell them what the rule was. Instead, he asked them to figure it out. As part of the research design, people could also test the rule. They could propose their own sequences, and Watson would tell them whether those sequences followed the rule. So you might notice that the numbers give the appearance of a rule, like even numbers increasing by 2. When you see 2, 4, 6, you think those are even numbers increasing by 2. So your tendency might be to try to test this by offering numbers like 8, 10, 12, or 20, 22, 24. When you offer those numbers, Watson would tell you, yes, this follows the rule. So then you try 30, 32, 34. And again, Watson says, yes, this follows the rule. At that point, you feel pretty confident that you figured it out. The problem is you haven't. The rule was actually not sequential numbers increasing by 2. It was just numbers increasing in value. By this rule, saying 1, 5, 500, 20 million would still have followed the rule. So would 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The experiment demonstrated the problem inherent in the ways people test their assumptions about reality. Once participants developed a basic hypothesis, many tended to propose examples that would confirm it. But the reality is that every time 8, 10, 12 worked, they learned only that their theory could be true, could be correct, could explain the phenomenon. But they didn't actually learn anything about reality. Now, confirmation bias can manifest in a variety of ways. One way is that people can selectively look for information that supports what they already believe. Or, when provided with information, they can choose to interpret that information differently based on their previously held beliefs. And that information can come in the form of social phenomena, political events, or simple daily communication. Many will actually aggressively scrutinize information that opposes their beliefs, while letting information that supports their beliefs slide by without a second thought. A particular aspect of this tendency was studied in the late 70s. It answered the question, how will people with strong beliefs about the death penalty react to different sets of data? Some that supports the notion that capital punishment is a strong crime deterrent, some that supports the notion that capital punishment does not deter crime. In this research, on both sides of the issue, participants largely evaluated evidence that supported their previously held beliefs positively, while evaluating evidence that negated their previously held beliefs negatively. You can look up Lord, Ross, and Lepper's 1979 article, Biased Assimilation and Attitude Polarization. Point is, you can lead a person to information, but you can't make them gain knowledge. Another thing to keep in mind is that this is not about a person's intelligence. It's more about their ego, their culture, their existential dread, and other socio-psychological factors. So what this tells us is that being able to reason well and being willing to turn that reasoning against your own position are two very different things. And even though cultivation theory is several decades old, it still applies really well to modern media consumption contexts. Now more than ever, people do not encounter information randomly or passively. They choose what to click, who to follow, and which sources they trust, support, and share. People are active in the construction of their own preferences through their ability to choose. Most people actively choose to consume information that aligns with their wants and their desires and their beliefs and their preferences. This tendency is sometimes referred to as selective exposure, and it matters because repeatedly making the same choice about media again and again over time, repeatedly selecting certain information can make some ideas become more familiar than others and can cause people to develop problematic affinities to some perspective and resistances to others, or what we might more simply refer to as biases. Thanks for listening. Thank you.